I'm here. My mom has a place up in Northport, and I'm here helping her to close up the farm and get things ready for the winter. And I happen to have a lot of rowing in my background. So my brother, who rows for the club, John Weber, had said that there might be an opportunity for me to plug in. So that's how I happened here. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about who I am and then talk a little bit about the Coxswain Clinic and what we're going to really talk about. So I didn't start rowing until I was in college. So for the middle schoolers, Tavin, you have a great opportunity here. And for the high schoolers, it's fantastic, to be able to be exposed to rowing before, you get to college. It really is one of those sports that's a lifetime sport. You can do it pretty much any time of, in your life, but to learn it early is really to be something that you can just hold on to for a very long time. So in college, I went to the University of Michigan, and as a freshman, I was a little shorter than I am now. I actually grew about 5 inches in college, but I was a lot lighter. So I was about 120 pounds. So I'm normally about 175. So I was walking across campus, I don't know, the first week of school, and there were these 4 big women standing next to, at the time, I thought it was a very big boat. It happened to be a 4. I thought, oh my God, look at this long boat. And they saw me walking across and they made a beeline for me and they said, how would you like to be in charge of 8 people and make them do whatever you want? And I was like, wow, what's that? And I had sailed for almost all of my life. I was a windsurfer. I understood the water, etc. But I didn't know what rowing was about. I didn't know what crew was about. So I went to this mass meeting, and it was for novices. And so University of Michigan has an annual enrollment of about 50,000. We went to the student union, and there were probably 300 or 400 students there, men, women. And I went to the very first practice. It was all novices, and there was this big guy, and his name was Mike Caviston. He's like, all right, that half of the group, you guys go for a run. That half of the group, come with me. And that was it. And so first day, I ran 3.5, 4 miles, thought I was going to die. I got back, and because of my size, I simply was sort of shoehorned into, I think you'll be a good coxswain. And I'm sort of giving a little bit of background because coxswains don't always have to be the smallest person. They don't have to be that person that looks like they're the outsider to the rest of the group, but coxswains tend to be that smaller person because effectively their contribution isn't necessarily physical. So I went on for 4 years to cox for the University of Michigan. I coxed both the men's first boat and the women's first boat. At that time, it was a club program. Then in my junior year, I made the U.S. national team for coxing. So I went on to cox for the national team. I didn't make the final cut for the final selection. So I ended up returning back to Michigan and we had the best year ever for Michigan. We cleaned up at all the regattas. After that, I went on to coach for the women's program. They hired me on as a coach, and I coached there for 2 years. And then decided that Ann Arbor needed to have a high school rowing program. We needed a feeder program for Michigan. So I started a high school rowing team called Huron High School, which you guys rowed against just recently. That was 25 years ago. So that program is very old. I walked into Pioneer the first day because they were the bigger of the high schools, and I said, I want to start this rowing program, and the athletic director laughed me out of the office. So I kind of walked across the street and went to Huron, and they said, sure. And I ended up with this hodgepodge of people, athletes. I stole some kids from the football team. I got some kids from the water polo team. I got some swimmers. I got a couple cross-country kids. And I borrowed boats from Michigan, and we started a program. And, you know, it's 25 years later, it's still going. So to come to a place like Fountain Point and see a program which has had, you know, some growing pains, but to have all of you really sort of take a moment and take stock in the equipment that you have, you're really, really fortunate. Most of the time, you get a boat for a starting program that is so twisted that if you look straight down the keel, you know, it's off to starboard in the stern and, you know, off to port in the bow. And it's just, it's like a piece of spaghetti. It just twists and turns. So, you know, the fact that you have such great shells, oars, you know, all of the real intricate things are here. So I've done both coaching, coxing. I was a sculler, so I actually competed at the head of the Charles in sculling. I rowed twice in the single, and then I've competed coxing there 5 times. I've coached both men's crews and women's crews down the course. And then sprint races in the spring, you know, gone to Canadian Henley, Masters Nationals, Open Nationals, all around the country, and had an incredible experience doing it. So for those of you, for the high schoolers, middle schoolers, you have a long road ahead of you in terms of different opportunities at different levels. You know, for the Masters rowers, there are tremendous regattas, but I think for the younger people here, the thing is that you're gonna see how the sport becomes more and more intense until you finally get to that collegiate level. So, which is really exciting. So that brings me here. So I am here to try to talk a little bit about what it means to be a coxswain. Does anybody have any questions about me and my background so far? I just want everybody to sort of know, because I think it's been out there in bits and pieces, but it hasn't sort of, you know, pulled itself together. So I wanted everybody to know. Not that you're putting me on the spot, Joe, huh? So I have 3 children back in New Hampshire. It makes it tough for me to be able to make that kind of a commitment, but I would love to be able to come out for maybe a bulk of the summer and work with some crews and in the program, or maybe do some intense clinics or something like that. You know, I've met some just terrific people since I've been here. I mean, you know, high school kids, you guys are dedicated, you're out there. You know, the master's program is, oh, there's just such depth there, and, you know, it's happening. Today I went out for the first time with the men. Had never seen the men. That was exciting to see them. That program has a lot of growing potential, where they really only have an 8 and a 4. So if we could build the depth in that program and get it up to like 3 8s, that would be even better. Just in terms of being able to offer different varieties of rowing, different levels of rowing, that would be really exciting. But the women, right now, I think we're going to have 5 women's 8s in the regatta just for Lake Leelanau. So that's pretty good. So very exciting. If I don't know your name and you speak and ask me a question, please tell me your name, you know, even if you think I know your name, but let me know. I'm not shy about that, so. All right, so this is what we're going to cover today. What's the role of the coxswain? We're going to talk a little bit about the equipment. Everybody rows in it every day, but do you really know what the equipment's about? What it means to be prepared as a coxswain? What are some drills? People that have had me coach them know that I'm big on drills. We do drills at the beginning of practice, and then we do workout at the end. And that's because you take what you learn from the drill and you incorporate it into the workout. What does it mean to race and what does it mean to practice? 2 different things, but they both play off of each other and how that's important. And then hopefully get hands-on, you know, at the end of the day. I don't know that we will, but hopefully we will. And anywhere along the way, stop me, throw your hand up, throw something at me, Tom, whatever. I want you guys to ask questions, okay? And I will do my best to answer as genuinely as possible. So, what's the role of the coxswain? This is Webster's dictionary definition of the coxswain. Now, if anybody's ever done anything with the Coast Guard, they actually have coxswains on Coast Guard boats. They're the ones who really direct where the boats are going to go, etc. They steer, they do a number of things. But does this really describe what a coxswain does for rowing? Kind of, a little bit. You know, this part, if I can do this. Oh, by the way, I just want to say, I'm going to put a plug in for, so, oh, Amy here? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, okay. She's my technical person. This is Kim. She loaned all of the really technical stuff from her job, so thank you, Kim. So you're really not a sailor, okay, but are they in charge of a ship's crew and they usually steer? Well, yeah, kind of. Steersman of a racing show who usually directs the rowers. Well, does that really sum it all up? We have some coxswains that are here. We have some rowers that are here, which is great. I love that there are rowers here because oftentimes rowers are like, whatever, I just have to listen to what they say and you know, I don't really care. It's nice to see that because you get a different perspective. Anybody that is a coxswain want to expand on this and tell me what you think it is? What's missing here? There's actually a lot that's missing. Shelley? Okay. Oh, Kim? Motivation, yep.
And coaching, as well, or assisting the coach.
Assisting the coach, okay. Anything else?
Leadership.
Leadership. Anything else? Those are all three, those three are true?
Boat safety.
Safety. Good. Anything else? What about helping, what about being on the water during a race? What is their job during a race? Strategy. They execute. They're also an assistant coach in many respects. Some people think this is what they really are. The coach's evil minion. In a collegiate program, not so much here, but in a collegiate program, you know, and on a national team, you know, the coxswain is in charge of getting the athletes in shape, warming them up, following through on practices, and they're just really tough on them. I have had crews put a boat into the water, and if I didn't like it, I have them take it back out, put it back to the shoulders, we walk off the dock, we come back down, and we do it again until it's perfect. And crews hate that. But you do it because it matters. Because if you break the equipment, somebody could get injured. You have to be efficient on the dock. And so as a coxswain, you need to be able to find those moments where you can say, we didn't do that right, okay? The other night we had, I had this great row with the women. We came off on, I think it was Thursday night. Just, they were fantastic. And we were pulling the boat off, and the coxswain had called for hands-on, and only half had grabbed, and the other half hadn't. And so she said, up and over the heads, well, nobody was in the bow. So as they started to lift it, the whole bow started to go into the water. I was like, whoa! So that was one of those moments where, you know, as the coxswain, they should have pulled the crew back from the boat, explained what went wrong, and then gone back towards it. So we'll talk about some of those things. The role of the coxswain. Some of these things we just talked about. Safety is paramount. That's really a big part of who you are. There are so often times when a boat is left alone without a coach next to them on the water, and the coxswain needs to be aware of everything. Power boats coming at them. You know, is there a wake coming in? Are they in shallow water? You know, is there something floating out front? What's going on? And they need to be proactive. Steering, big part of what you're doing while you're out there. Facilitating the practice, coxswains that I've worked with, since I've been here, they know how I try to incorporate them in to get the practice. I usually talk to them before we go out, what we're going to do for a warm-up, what the body of the practice might be, and then they help to execute it. Executing the race plan, we talked about that. Serving as the eyes, ears, and the voice of the boat. So that's both on land and on the water. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means by being on land. Motivating your crew. I think, Kim, you had said that. That's a big thing, and we're going to spend some time on that. But there's lots of ways to motivate. And then, what's a boatman? Does anybody know what a boatman is? Kim?
Person who fixes the shells.
There you go. Maintenance, in charge, understand your equipment. And usually it's done mostly in the off season, but during the season, I'll tell you this, I broke a few skegs when I was coxing, and my coach, we'd have to go right back to the dock, we'd pull it off, and the crew would have to wait until after practice, and then we'd put a new skeg on, and I learned how to do that. I learned how to do boat repair. I learned a whole bunch of different things. Here's a funny one. So, safety. Understand your surroundings and protect your crew and the equipment at all times. All right? This is really, really important. When you're on land, there's all kinds of different things that you need to think about. Getting it off the racks, working it down to the water. How do we get there? There have been times where there are, party tents here. You got to navigate around those. There are vehicles that are out there. Maybe somebody's has a boat in slings and you've got to get around that. There's a boat coming off the dock. There's another boat that wants to get onto the dock. You've got all of these things that as a coxswain you have to be in charge of from the moment you arrive at practice. I know that people have homework, they have other responsibilities, but when you get here, your head has to be about the practice and what you're going to be doing. It's important to think about what you're going to do well in advance of doing it so that you can articulate it to the crew. The first signal to a crew that you are about to do practice and really make things happen is when you yell, hands on. Don't do anything until the coxswain says hands on. Once that happens, the crew should say, all right, game on. This is it. We're going out to practice. And when they touch that boat, they should never do anything until you give them the next command. And you have to be clear about how you do that. It has to be, whether it's an into account or ready up or hands on, and then you explain what you're going to do and then you execute it. No one moves without you saying so, and that's really important. So as the rowers, you need to then be disciplined enough to say, they didn't say lift it, I'm not lifting it, okay? When you're on the land, you also need to know, you need to walk where they can't see. Most people I see walk down to the dock at the bow of the boat, okay? Well, everybody's facing the bow, right? So if there's an obstacle up there, they're going to see it. But when you are talking towards the front of the boat and there's 8 rowers behind you, they can't hear you. So when you yell way enough, they can't hear you back there. But if you're at the stern of the boat and you yell way enough, that's fine. Exceptions to all rules. If you're in a regatta site situation, you do want to walk towards the bow. And the reason for that is because things get congested. People are going to try to horn their boat in front of you. They'll try to snake you in line. They'll come down another alley and, the line is 5 boats back and they want to cut in front of you. And you need to be assertive, not a jerk, but assertive and say, line's back there, okay? We've got a race. And they're like, well, we have a race too. It's like, hey, we were ready with our crew. We're here. You need to get back in line. Let the dock master handle jockeying people around. Don't give anybody cuts unless the dock master tells you to, okay? You get in line, you stay there, and you be assertive. And, you know, if you're at the head of the Charles, they have lots of different places that they boat out, but Magazine Beach is the typical one. And, you know, there are, I think there are up to 8,000 competitors that converge on Boston for 2 days. Imagine getting all those boats onto the water. Now, a lot of them go out of some of the college boathouses. They'll row out of there, they'll borrow boats, but most of them are at Magazine Beach. So you have this flood of people trying to get down to the docks. And, you know, they usually have 2 or 3 launching docks and, you know, 2 return docks. But it's a scramble. And so you need to have your wits about you. As a coxswain, if you look flustered, what's going to happen to your crew? They're going to feel flustered. So that's part of that leadership that we talked about. And so when you give a command, you have to be confident about it. You can't just say, hands on. Like they're not going to respond with confidence. But if you're like, hands on, they're like, oh, what happened to Tom? You know, he's usually a nice guy. Well, I'm serious now because we're about to go out. I threw these things in, whether you read them or not, but these little tips in here. This is really a big thing. Take charge of a situation that you feel, if there's a safety as a concern, you can apologize later. You're out on the water, somebody is about to come into your lane or into your warm-up area or something, turn your Cox box up and yell at that crew, okay? You can apologize later. When you get on the water, that's where, if you are out with a coach's launch, that's different. The coach's launch can take charge, but they may not. Sometimes I'm staring at the crew and I'm working on coaching and I don't always look ahead. So if you see an obstacle, you need to either steer around it, stop the boat, do whatever it takes to keep the boat safe and the rowers safe. It's very easy for very large objects to get hidden behind 8 rowers. A huge power boat could be ahead of you, but when you're down like this, you can't see it. And all of a sudden, you run into it. So you need to be aware of those things. I haven't been here in the summer, but I have to believe there's a lot of powerboat traffic out here. And so, you know, you're probably getting waked constantly, probably, you know, water skiers, jet skiers, all manner of different things. Some of the hardest boats to see are canoes and kayaks, you know, because they're pretty narrow. And you can do a lot of damage if you got 8 people rowing, you know, at a clip and you hit something like that. I've hit geese before. I've hit swans. I've seen boats run into bridges. We have one bridge up here to get through, and that's fairly narrow. So if you've got traffic, and I'm not sure where it is. I think it might be in this next slide, but let's see. So traffic, okay. If you are rowing shell and there's a power boat that is moving, the power boat, because it's under power, has to give way to you. If you're in the Narrows and you're going to pass another boat, you pass port to port, okay? That's just rules of the road. You always pass port to port. If in doubt, when in doubt, take charge of the situation. Either stop, ask your coach for some guidance, or say something to the other boat or something that's going to happen. But passing port to port is important. If there are 2 racing shells out there and they're coming in opposite directions, same thing, port to port. Okay, as coxswains, you should know that. You shouldn't go starboard to starboard, that's bad. However, if it looks like that's easier to do than swinging across their path and trying to go port to port, then do the starboard to starboard, because the safer thing would be to do that rather than cut across their path of practice. Does that make sense? Because you don't want to create a worse situation than you're in. This is the head of the Charles. Guess where this is? That's near the start line, okay? And this opens way up, there are usually 2 or 3 races staging, and each race has anywhere from 30 to 50 boats in it at a time. Now, as the coxswain, it's your responsibility to warm your crew up, get them to the line safely, be at the start line at the appropriate time and for the event. So there have been times when I've been at head races where I've seen a men's crew go in a women's race because the coxswain thought it was their race, and they shoot down and there's all these other men's boats waiting, and so they missed their race. So it's considered a do not start. So they're not disqualified, they just missed their race. So you need to be mulling around in the right spot. In head races, you have to be at the line behind the boat ahead of you in a certain interval. Usually it's a 10-second spread between the boats as they cross the start line. However, they'll just mark your time for wherever it is. So if you're 15 seconds, that just means you're starting an extra 5 seconds behind there. The difference, though, is that your crew wants to know that they have started 10 seconds behind. And the reason for that is because if they start to catch the other boat, they know they've already made up 10 seconds. They're now 10 seconds faster than that boat, instead of being 15 or 20 seconds faster. Does that make sense? So that spacing is very important. As the coxswain, you need to be at full power. So if it's a race of 50 boats and you're number 34, you're going to look for the bow number that's 33, right? You're also going to look for 32, because 33 might not be where they need to be. And if you see 32 shoot down the course and there's no if you see 32 go across the line and there's no 33, guess who's going to go next? You, if you're 34. You have to plan that far in advance. So just make sure that you are ready to go 2 or 3 steps ahead of the game. Some regattas, the marshals will call you to the line and they'll ask you to get to power at a certain point. Most of the time they don't. They'll just, Masters, men's 8, 30 seconds, 30 seconds. And so if it's 30 seconds to the line for that race, but you're 30th in the start position, you've still got a ways to go before you have to cross that line. So you got to keep the crew calm and focused, okay? And I guarantee you somebody's going to shoot across your bow, or somebody's going to crab, or their oarlock's going to pop just 20 seconds before you're supposed to go across the line. So you got to keep your wits about you. Your voice matters. If you start to crackle and you start to get panicky or something happens, your crew will sense it. If you've been practicing with them long enough, they will sense it, and that'll just go through the boat. But if you handle that, your crew is going to perform at a level that they have never performed before, because they want that as much as you do. Hey, what happened here? Very common in head racing. When you pass a boat, coxswains don't want to yield and give way. So boats will overlap and oars will hit each other. And you'll put an oar between 2 rowers and just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and keep hitting, one seat and the other. It gets very, very violent. Okay. I have been on the Charles where 2 boats will enter a bridge and one comes out, because the other one hits the abutment, scrapes their oars against the side and smashes 2 or 3 of them. And there are fouls that are assessed for that, but there are also injuries that happen. So right here, you can see this coxswain is leaning away saying something, I'm sure, colorful. And these other rowers are looking at each other like, what just happened? Because both these boats have basically lost. Not only penalties, but for them to then focus back in and finish that race is going to be really tough. So who's really at fault here? It's both the coxswains. The rowers have no fault in this. It's the coxswains. But the rowers take their aggression out, and I kid you not, they'll take their oar and slam it against somebody else's gunnel. They'll whack somebody's head. I mean, they'll pull it out of the oarlock and shove it at somebody. They're so pissed And for them to then pull it back together is really tough. And it will matter. It's ugly. If you ever have a chance to go down to the head of the Charles, the Weeks Footbridge is a terrific place to sit because, man, it's just a great spot as they come under the Weeks Footbridge. It's a really good spot to be. So as coxswains, though, this could be avoided. If you are overtaking a boat in a race, the boat that you are overtaking must yield. They must yield. It doesn't mean, if someone's overtaking you, it doesn't mean you have to give up. It just means you have to move. If they're going to pass you on your port side, you've got to ease over and give them that space. It doesn't mean that you have to let up on pressure, okay? But you can't force a dangerous situation. Shelley.
So if you're the one that's getting passed, you're that coxswain, are you supposed to be looking over your shoulder to see who's coming up on you?
Well, you can, but the best thing for you is, well, the stroke really shouldn't be able to talk if they're doing full prower. Like they shouldn't be able, they might like, oh, they might say something like guttural, but they really shouldn't be talking, like, oh. But what can happen, and I talk to my coxswains about this, is if you are about to overtake a boat, you turn up your cox box and you make your presence known. Okay? If the crew is wearing, a jersey that says, I don't know, like Loyola, okay? You turn up your box and you go, Loyola, we're taking you. Give way. And their crew gets pissed. And generally, they might crab or something else might happen, but it motivates your crew because they're like, Shelley is in charge. She's getting us through the rest of the fleet. It's a way to motivate them, okay? And then you take them. You take a 10 and boom, you're gone. Take a 20 and you're gone. But you give that announcement. The head of the Charles, they have officials, I don't know, like all over the course, on the shore, on the bridges. They're in launches, and they will assess penalties. So if you make that kind of an announcement and an official hears you and the other boat doesn't yield, they'll give a time knock to the other crew. So it's really important to do that, to make yourself known. And so as a coxswain, you also need to be aware if somebody is coming up on you. And you'll know. You'll hear that. You'll hear the rhythm of your boat, but you'll hear the rhythm of the boat behind you. And you'll be like, all right, someone's coming up on us. And so at that point, you've got to look behind you and say, are they on my port or my starboard side? So this does happen. I have witnessed it. Hey, same thing. Look at that. He does not look happy. So again, basically these crews, their race is over. After they get all this stuff parted and spaghetti is done, they still have to get back into the swing, but it's going to be really tough. I think in spring, when you do sprint races, which is where people are in lanes, you really don't have that issue. I have seen coxswains literally cross over into somebody else's lane, at which point, generally, if they don't interfere with the other boat, they're not disqualified. But if they interfere with the other boat by crossing over, like fully into the other lane, hull is over the buoys, you're disqualified. Okay? And then the other boat, if they can allow for it, they usually get an automatic advance to the next heat. But not always. So again, this is something that could have been avoided. These rowers are all going to be really upset. Uh-oh. What happened there? So, remember I told you how tough it can be when you're coxing and you have tunnel vision? So they didn't finish the race. They ran right into that bridge abutment. Okay. But, this coxswain is so focused on the crew that she literally didn't see a bridge ahead of her. And this happens, it happens in a race situation. It can happen in a practice situation as well. Out here, I would see it happening more with the buoys, less with the bridge. but there are some tall buoys that can get, really narrow when you're in that coxswain seat. And so you need to be aware of that. Boats, canoes, kayaks, somebody decides they're going to jump off of their jet ski and go for a swim and just leave it floating. Suddenly you don't see it, Somebody's on a windsurfer, their sail is down and the board is floating, you don't see it. Same thing. So, yeah, this kind of sucked, but it does happen. So they, for a coxswain to live that one down takes a lot. Any questions on safety? So safety happens on land and it happens on the water. And it's really your responsibility as the coxswain to keep your crew safe, okay? In as many ways as you can think. And once you're done racing, you can then help out other crews. If you're at practice, it's the exact same thing. So you want to practice how you want to race. You need to be safe. When you get to a regatta site, a visiting regatta site, first thing you should do as a coxswain is, if they have an information tent, is go and find out if there are any obstacles on the water you need to be made aware of before you go out and do a practice row. Are there buoys? Is it a tidal river? Does the tide come up and go down? Is there a current somewhere? Are there shallow areas? Things like that you may not be aware of. And then get familiar with that. Also with the warm-up pattern, okay, and the practice pattern. I tend to tell my crews here, before we go out, I'll say, Kim, take it to the center of the boat, of the lake and face north. We're going to go north today. And I'll say, the high schoolers went south. I want to give them space and we're going to go north. That way she's aware that there are crews south. Nothing's north in terms of boats, but she knows that because I may have been here for a practice before and I know where people are boating out. So I try to give my coxswains at least a little knowledge of what traffic is out there that I know of, okay? Steering. Steering's where you are going to be, not where you are. I don't know that high schoolers, who drives here? Any of you drive? Okay. Eventually you'll drive. A lot of times when you're driving, you try to look further down the road so that you can predict if somebody's coming out of a driveway or you're coming to an intersection or something, and you think, okay, I've got to give way, there's a biker up front. Same thing here. I will talk to my coxswains when we're in a practice, and I'll say, coxswains, get a point, we're heading south, there's a boat hoist, 600 meters down, aim towards that. The other night, on Thursday, we all rode towards the church steeple. It was high enough of the tree line, it was a good visual, we could sort of point on that. And what that does is it helps the coxswains, have a land mass or a land point to go off of, but then important when you have 2 boats or 3 boats, multiple boats that you're practicing with, that you want the coxswains to keep those boats, the oar tips, about 20 to 30 feet apart. When they start to get further apart, as a coach, you can't coach both boats. The other night, on that Thursday, which was such a good row, unfortunately I had one coxswain, we were up in the pond up here, decide to go to one side of this, the mass of weeds. So they went up starboard on that side. And then the other one decided, well, I'm just going to go to port. So they were like, 100 meters apart by the time we finished, and I couldn't talk to both of them. So we talked about keeping the boats together and how important that is. So when you steer, steering is the one time when the coxswain makes the boat unbalanced. So every time you touch your rudder, you are causing the boat to become unbalanced. And it's important, like we're on a big lake here. I mean, it's huge, it's wide. And you think, do I have to be that straight? It doesn't matter, I can kind of zigzag or do whatever I want because there's nothing for me to really hit. Well, if we were to take an aerial of you and your course was like this going down there, that means your boat while it's trying to, the rowers are trying to learn to set the boat, they're also fighting your steering. So you need to be as straight as you can all the time. Make minor corrections where you can. If you feel like you're creeping away from another boat, slowly get on your rudder and ease back over. When you haul on it, okay, you're basically putting on like a water brake, and that pivot point for the boat is the rudder. It's right there, the skeg. That's where it pivots off of. It basically holds into the water, and that's where you're turning. So you're kind of swinging that bow from this one point. That's why if it's like a cruise ship, you want to kind of think about moving it. Similarly, when you are on a race course for head racing, the head of the Grand, everybody was just down there. That's a curvy course. There's some curves in there. As a coxswain, you should set up, you should know that course. You should know how you're going to come out of one corner, how you're going to enter another corner. You know, the head race here next weekend, it's pretty much a straight shot. There's a slight bend in there. If we end up in the pond, there's a slight curve. But the problem is there aren't a lot of landmarks to sort of get your point off of. And if you're trying to pass another crew, you need to try to understand, are they steering off? Are they steering a longer course, or are they steering a shorter course? And you have to decide how you want to pass them. Do I want to pass them on the starboard side or on the port side? You know, because they may be heading, as they're coming down this way, maybe they're heading towards this shore, and they should probably be heading slightly to that shore to cheat it a little so you can make the corner a little bit better. So you need to sort of know those things. Steering, you know, this little tip over here, every boat that has ever been made has a certain turning speed, okay? Does anybody know the boat manufacturer called Pocock? Pococks are really old. They're from the Midwest, or I'm sorry, they're from the Northwest. Great boats, wooden boats originally. Originally, the rudder was at the very tip of the stern, and then the skeg was further up, and it was usually just a fixed piece of metal. Now they're, you know, all kinds of different things, rubber, composites, whatever. So those boats used to steer like cargo tankers. I mean, they were like pieces of lumber going through the water. They just took forever to steer. They weren't great. They weren't very reactive. And so you would hit that rudder, and it would be four strokes, and you'd really start to see the boat to actually react. The boats here, because that rudder is right behind the skeg, are more reactive. So most of the boats here are about a 2 to a 3 stroke boat. The Casper that we have up here is more like a 3 to a 3.5 stroke boat, maybe a 4 stroke one. The Alley Romeo, that's going to be another like 3 or 4 stroke boat. And so you need to understand before you get into a boat how quickly it's going to respond. Sometimes when you borrow a boat, you go to a regatta site and you borrow a boat, you don't have a lot of choice. You just sort of have to do it. MPOCers tend to be the more reactive boats. Vespos are better now. Resolutes are very reactive. We don't have a Resolute, but they're a very fast reactive boat. So understand what that means in terms of how many strokes your boat takes to turn. Any questions? I'm going through some of this kind of fast, so yes.
When you're doing the ruddering,
Yep.
I've heard different things about when is the best time if you have to make an adjustment, when they're actually on the drive or when they're actually
Great question. Ideally, if you can do it, when the oars are in the water, hit your rudder, okay? And because what happens is when the oars are out, you want the boat to run. And so if you're back to center, you know, if you're back to neutral, the boat is able to run and get some speed, then the oars go in the water and hit the rudder again, okay?
It's a rudder,
right.
rudder.
But in certain situations, you can't do that. I mean, you have like up here on the Narrows, okay? You just got to be on your rudder the whole time. I mean, you're not going that fast, but that would be an idea of one of those very long turns, you know? And the other thing that you can steer with is what? Rowers. How do we steer with the rowers?
Pressure on starboard or
Yep. add pressure or take pressure away. Never, unless it's, an emergency situation, don't have people drag oars to correct your course. Okay, that's just going to throw everything off. So if you're doing a drill and you need to move, you got your bow fore rowing, starboard's firm, port's ease off. Don't say in your stern fore, who aren't rowing, they're setting up like, ports, can you hold water? Don't do that. Use your rowers. You've already got an engine going, so use them. And they need to understand that. They need to learn how to do that. So it's not always the rudder, but rowers are very good for that too. But that was a great question, Shelley. Any other questions? Steering. I know some of this looks basic, but you would be surprised how you can get caught not doing it. Push the hand forward the way you want to go. Want to go right? Use your right hand. Want to go left? Use your left hand. Find a distance. Find a point in the distance and steer off of it. Well, if the point happens to be 3 miles down the lake, you can't really steer off of that. So what you have to do is you have to maybe gauge your spacing off of the distance from the shore. Okay? Like, am I getting closer to the shore? Am I getting further away from the shore? As a coach, I'll always steer off of my boats. I'll steer off of my shells. Don't steer off of me. I'll steer away from you. Okay? I got a motor. I'm happy to putz around and do whatever I want. I'll steer off of you. If you want to force me over, that's fine. Don't worry about me. I just want to make sure that you have a good point, okay? As much as is possible, find those distances find those points off in the distance. We just talked about it. Steering causes the boat to lose balance. And then you got to consider wind, current, and traffic. I mean, who hasn't been out here when it's been a windy day? And your bow gets a little bit off from being dead center on the wind, and the next thing you know, whoosh, you are just starting to move across the lake. It really matters. Sometimes you can't help it. Current and traffic, sometimes there's a little current coming through the narrows. You can sometimes feel that. Traffic's big, that the narrows is not very wide, and you need to be very aware of that. I tend to, since I've been here, I tend to not go up the narrows because I'm chasing daylight with my practices, and it's like 15 minutes getting through there, and we're not doing much when we're doing that. It's like, we're just sort of babysitting each other. So on a morning like today, I could have gone up there because we had a full 2 hours. It was beautiful. We could have done that. So, but traffic can play a part of that. So we just talked about this. Port to port, power boats easing off, yielding. Hey, anybody know what this is? This is the head of the Charles. Okay, this is the start line. Okay, you come down, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bridges. 6 chances. So I used to, back in Ann Arbor, if you guys have rode at Argo, there are a series of bridges. I think they're up to 3 now. Maybe they built a 4th. I used to yell to my coxswains, no heroics on the bridges. Because I used to race my boats, and whoever was in the lead got to stay in the lead, and the other one had to fall behind them. But once we got through the bridges, they could come back side to side. So we didn't have that. Still, we had oars scrape, etc. What did this coxswain do? This person, very smart. What are you staring at as a coxswain, besides the beautiful stroke ahead of you, the face of the rower ahead of you? You're staring at your legs. So they wrote down not only the race plan, but how to get through each of these corners, how to set themselves up around here. Now, were they reading it? I doubt it, but it's a good reminder. So, there are things like Weeks Foot Bridge, Salt and Pepper Bridge, BB&N, different landmarks, things like that. Very smart, very smart. Use what you have, bare legs. Not always is the Charles a pleasant day. I mean, it can be really bitter. I mean, it is the end of October when they have it. But you can see, imagine up in this staging area. Okay, this is the start line. So there's this big, they call it the basin up here. Imagine, 300 or 400 boats. Okay? And you're in one of those races. Okay? So you don't always want to be at the very start. You don't want to be hanging around there because everybody gets nervous and the whole thing. But you don't want to be way away, because then you're never going to hear the call. And sometimes there are delays on the course because there's an accident, and so it pushes the start time back. So you have to be aware of that. And whenever possible, as a coxswain, when you're out there, there are usually marshalling boats. And you can go up to a marshalling boat and you can say, I'm in the Women's Masters 8, it's, event 12. Are there any delays that I need to be aware of? They're usually queued in with walkie-talkies, and they can call to the line and say, do we have any delays? Is there any delay? And if there is, you get bonus points from your crew because they're like, look at that, that's great. We're 5-minute delay, so we can relax a little bit. Or, nope, everything's running on time. Then you go about the same thing. Look for the 2 people ahead of you so you're across the line in time. Fun race. If you guys get a chance, enter the Charles. Facilitating practice. Okay. These are some of the things that I like to see from my coxswains. And when I was a coxswain, this is what I would do too. But in many respects, the coxswain is a junior coach. There used to be a flow chart in our boathouse. It said, God, coach, coxswain, rower. And so the coxswain has to understand what is it that as a crew we need to accomplish for that day, for that week, or for that season. And then how, as the coxswain, am I going to get the best out of my crew? How do I get to that point? So you talk to your coach ahead of time. And a lot of times I'll pull coxswains aside and I'll say, Shelly and Kim, this is what we're going to do today out on the water. We're going to do our standard warm-up. And then we're going to do this, that, and the other thing. And in your boat, Shelly, I really want to be working on this. And Kim, in your boat, this is what I want to be working on. And then this is what we're going to do for pieces. This is what our workout's going to be. And you understand as a coxswain, then there's a rhythm to the workout. That doesn't mean that as a coach, I don't have the prerogative to throw something in there and go, whoa, something's not working. But as a coxswain, you need to also, when a coach is coaching your boat, or another boat, you need to understand what are they saying and how is that affecting my boat. So it's one thing for a coach to just yell, 5, you're late at the catch. Okay, great. As a coxswain, you can see 7 oars are going in at the same time and then 1 oar is late. But why is it late? So what does the coach follow up with? Does the coach say, it's because you have slow hands? It's because you're hanging at the catch? Is it because... So there needs to be a follow-up from that coach for that critique to be effective. If I just yelled out, Shelly, your whole boat's hanging at the catch. I don't have to say anything more. The whole boat knows we're all hanging at the catch. What do we need to do? We got to get it in faster at the catch. And so as a coxswain, Shelly, you could say, all right, I want everybody to think about as we're approaching the catch that our hands are going to get light and they're going to rise up and we're going to try to set that oar in a little bit sweeter. It's going to drop in and we're going to have a little bit of nice backsplash and then we're going to turn those legs around and get right on that drive. That's that's where you're now a coach. You heard something from the coach, but then you added to it in a way that your crew appreciates that you know what you're talking about. And the coach appreciates and says, that was spot on. I didn't need to say anything else. So there's 2 ways that you can really work on that. you have to have a consistent warm-up. Each of the boats should have a consistent warm-up. I have one that I like to work with crews, and have been sort of working that in. But the reason you do that is because then you know day to day if your boat's feeling good. Okay? If you do the pick drill every day, and one day, just catches are way off, you're like, we've taken 10 strokes and it already sucks, So what's the rest of practice what's gonna happen with practice? Or, you get through the pick drill and it was incredible. And they're supposed to be at paddle pressure, and instead they're all humping on the oar at half pressure. And you're like, what's that about? So they want to go. Like, they're all gunning. I don't know, they're done with finals. It's a beautiful spring day. Who knows what it is? But something's into them. And you're like, that's when, if I have a coxswain, that they were doing the warm-up and I was delayed getting out with them, I might come up to the boat and I go, Ren, how'd it go today? How was the warm-up? And she's like, well, they got all that energy. Like, we were supposed to be on paddle and they were clearly at half pressure. And I was like, okay, how'd it feel? It felt great. We were hitting it. Everything was terrific. I'm like, okay. And now that tells me I can change the workout I was about to do. I can add some more to this if we can carry that through. But that's the kind of feedback that a coxswain has to be able to give to a coach. So that's why consistent warm-ups are so important. Additionally, when you get to a race, if you do a foreign warm-up, like something you're not familiar with, and something doesn't work, it's going to screw the boat up. They're going to be all nervous because they're like, wait a minute, we've never done a pause drill, and now we're doing a pause drill, and none of us are coming out at the same time, and and it just panics people. So familiarity is important, but not complacency. It's important to be familiar but not complacent. If you're complacent, it's like, oh, great, pick drill again. I've only done it about 700 times. No, it's the place to really start and build off of. So speak when the coach is not. The only time that you can do something when the coach is speaking is if you have to correct your course. So if you're sitting dead still, okay, and a coach is talking to you, and there's a wind and you start to drift, go ahead and say, bow, touch it, 3, give me a stroke. That's fine while the coach is talking. But if the coach is giving instruction, don't start to go into some monologue about, who was doing what wrong or right during the practice. Let the coach finish. The other time is if you are in the middle of a piece, if you're in the middle of a workout and you're trying to motivate your crew, and the coach comes up alongside and starts yelling at one of the rowers or starts commenting, and you're still in the middle of a, something you're saying, go ahead and finish that, okay? Because the coach is the coach. The coach is just going to start blurting stuff out whenever they feel like they want to. But as the coxswain, you need to finish your sentence or your motivation or your drill or whatever it is, because ultimately you're in charge of that crew. There's a balance, there's a dance that goes on between coaches and coxswains, and when they should talk and when they shouldn't, and it's a lot of it comes down to feel. Some coaches are really strict and they don't want you to say word one if they are talking. Like if you are in the middle of a command and they start blurting something out, you got to stop. So you have to understand your coach, Communicate with the coach on the water. Okay? That could be anything from, hand signals. How many people that I've coached so far have you heard me say, when we're at half power, put your arm up? So that's a way of communicating, right? Yep. I mean, you don't have to say anything to me. I just know when we're there. And then if I'm like, that's not half power, but you say it's half power, I'm like, I'll call you out on it and go, dude, that's not half power. But also communicate at the end of pieces if you can and say, we didn't have the run on that one. Or I just, I was working with 7 and I couldn't get them to link up with stroke. Or, bow is really late and I can't see what it is, but their oar seems to be skying, because the coach, while they try to take in everything, they may not follow everything. And if there are 2 boats next to each other, the coach is usually looking in the distance and then looking in the foreground, and they're trying to go back and forth and back and forth. So there's a lot that goes on. I love having 2 boats at the same time. I really prefer it because then when you coach one boat, the boat that's sitting out can watch the other boat and see what the coaching corrections do. So, if you have bow 4 in both boats rowing, then the stern 4 can look at the other boats and watch the corrective coaching. It really matters. And then when you do pieces, that's even better. It's like seat racing. Understand your crew. Nobody should know your crew better than you. Oftentimes you know your crew better than the coach. You know that if you say one little thing to the stroke, like Shelley, if you look at Terry and you say to her something, there's something between the 2 of you. I might not know it, but it's some magic word. Maybe you wink at her when you want her to really get on the legs, and nobody else sees it but her. Who else would know that? But when she sees that wink from you, she's like, that's it. I'm turning on the legs, Could be, but those are the sorts of things that you, as a coxswain, only you know. And you develop that. And you got to find your own tone, your own things. This morning I yelled at the men's boat, and they actually picked it up and got going. I said, row it like you stole it. And they were, all of a sudden, the legs just crammed down. And I was like, that was terrific. So use your strengths to improve your crew during each practice. I don't know what they are. You'll know your strengths. Are you better with a calm voice? Are you better with a grizzly voice? Are you better, not saying anything? Are you better, with are you better with your counting? So counting is one of the most important parts that a coxswain can do. You call a 10. When that oar is just about to enter the water, if you say it a little bit faster and a little bit more crisp, sometimes you can speed up those catches. 1, 2, instead of 1, 2. You see the difference? You're lagging. So the crew's going to lag, but instead you're 1, 2, and then they're like, oh. And it translates. It does make a difference. Facilitating practice. Early morning practice. You might feel like the baby in the boat, but you're really the leader, okay? And the reason I say this is, the practice can oftentimes hinge on the performance of the coxswain in so many different levels. So you really need to feel like, I'm not the baby of the boat, I'm the leader of the boat, okay? And your crew will love you for it. They might harass you, like, before you get out on the water or whatever, but the minute you say hands-on, you show your leadership role. That's what you say. I'm now in charge, okay? And what I say goes. A good coach will not, unless absolutely necessary, reprimand a coxswain in front of their crew. They'll pull them aside after practice and say, hey, when you were out on the water and you said this, that was wrong. You should have said this. Or on land, you should have been walking at the stern of the boat today, not at the bow of the boat. Or you let go of the boat and had to run and get your cox box. You need to be ready that when that boat hits the dock, you got your cox box ready to go and you're ready to, this practice is ready to go. You don't leave that boat. But you don't do that in front of the rest of the crew. Those are sidebar conversations.